minutes talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilized conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GBNews for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GBNews Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Protesters take to the streets over the cost of living crisis. Labour extend their poll lead over the Tories, but are plagued with accusations of racism. And Sussex police defend a sex offender from the distress of being misgendered. This is Free Speech Nation. Welcome to the show. Over the past few days, there have been many protests in cities throughout the UK under the banner of Enough is Enough. Their goals have been clearly stated and expressed. The protesters are calling for a real pay rise, for energy bills to be slashed, for an end to food poverty, for decent housing for all, and for greater taxation on the wealthy. Debates over the cost of living crisis are, of course, endless. Economists have argued back and forth over whether Liz Truss's plan to grow the economy through tax cuts will have the desired impact, or whether they'll just benefit those with the most money. These protesters clearly take the view that the government's approach will be catastrophic. Some of the placards make it clear that some of those in attendance absolutely hate this government and would like to see it collapse. And so it's reassuring that they are able to express that view, because we live in a free country, and the hallmark of a functioning and healthy democracy is the right to peaceful protest. And whenever I see peaceful protests, irrespective of whether I agree with the protesters or not, I am reassured, because it means that for all the threats to free speech we currently face, we're still holding on to the right to assemble. This is also why I've been such a vocal opponent of the government's Police Crime Sentencing and Courts Bill, which was published in March last year. Now, this bill puts the onus on police to determine whether or not a protest should be allowed to go ahead, and even says that protests should be banned for being too loud or causing serious annoyance. Too loud? Protests are often loud. It's very difficult to tiptoe when you're carrying a placard. And what does serious annoyance mean? Protests will always annoy someone, otherwise there'd be no point. The language of this bill is hopelessly vague and open to exploitation. If the noise from a peaceful protest is deemed to have relevant impact on other citizens that may be significant, it could be shut down under this new law. And who gets to decide what's significant? Well, the Home Office. But what if the subject of the protest is the government itself? Surely there could be a conflict of interest there. Now, recently we saw anti-monarchist protesters arrested for holding up signs saying "Not my king." At least one of those arrests took place under the auspices of the new Police Crime and Sentencing Bill. And while the strength of feeling at the time of the Queen's death is understandable, the erosion of civil liberties can never be excused. The way we deal with those we find intolerant is through criticism, ridicule, sometimes counter-protest. Well, once you start supporting the state, arresting those you disagree with, you're setting a really dangerous precedent that could very well one day be used against the causes that you support. To give a concrete example of this, after what became known as the Battle of Cable Street on 4th of October 1936, where Oswald Molesley's black shirts were intercepted by anti-fascist demonstrators as they attempted to march through the East End of London, the Labour Party was instrumental in urging Parliament to rush through public order legislation to stop further uprisings by the far right. And yet, since their inception, these measures have mostly been used to crack down on left-wing activism. And in fact, they form the basis of the government's justification to arrest striking miners in the mid-1980s. And the lesson ought to be clear. If you grant the state the powers to restrict freedom of assembly and freedom of speech, you won't be able to predict how such powers are exploited in the future. And the same goes for hate speech laws. In 2012, the European Court of Human Rights concluded there is no universally accepted definition of the expression hate speech. And a manual published by UNESCO in 2015 accepted that the possibility of reaching a universally shared definition seems unlikely. And if you look at the various hate speech laws across Europe, it's clear that no one knows how it ought to be defined. As a result, You end up with people being arrested for jokes, or for quoting rap lyrics, or for retweeting memes. These laws are really dangerous, and they ought to be scrapped. But of course, our current government is pushing through their online safety bill, which is only going to make matters worse. So why did the government feel the need to crack down on protests? Well, partly it was because of a worrying trend that has escalated over the past few years. People have started to excuse violent protests because they are convinced that their cause is so righteous that anything can be justified. We've had environmental activists who have started to cause criminal damage. In last year, March, there were 3 members of Extinction Rebellion prosecuted for vandalising a number of buildings at Cambridge University. In September last year, activists from the group smashed windows at the headquarters of JP Morgan with hammers that were decorated with the words "live, laugh and love," because, of course, the most effective way of demonstrating love is with hammers. Now, we've also seen trans rights activists sending death threats and physically assaulting feminist protesters. Many of the Black Lives Matter protests in America turned violent, with politicians even making excuses for those who committed acts of violence. But all such activities undermine the protesters' cause. It should be really simple. We should support all forms of peaceful protest, whether we agree with the protesters' aims or not, and we should condemn all sorts of violent protests, whether we agree with the protesters' aims or not. And we shouldn't take these rights for granted. Do you think the equivalent of the enough is enough protests could happen in Iran? Look at the anti-government protests that are happening there right now. Soldiers and police have been instructed to severely confront these protesters, not the most subtle of euphemisms. And at least 52 people have been killed. This all started when 22-year-old Mahsa Amini was arrested by the morality police for not wearing a hijab. And her treatment at the hands of the authorities led to her death in custody. And in the wake of this atrocity, women have been taken to the streets to protest being treated as second-class citizens. Whereas in the West, some intersectional feminists promote wearing the veil as empowering, in theocracies like Iran, women understand that the garment is a means of misogynistic oppression. And the bravery of these protesters is unimaginable. Women have been putting their lives at risk, burning their veils publicly and dancing, all of which is, of course, forbidden by the religious authorities. And now, women in Afghanistan have taken to the streets in a show of solidarity. One Iranian journalist who filmed the protest asked one of the women if she should blur her face in the reporting. "No," she replied. "The Taliban blurs our face. We want to take our visibility back." Incredible courage. So whatever you think of the protests against the Tory government that have happened this weekend, remember that to live in a society in which peaceful protests are possible is a wonderful thing. Throughout history, one of the first rights that tyrants restrict is the right to protest. And we need to be wary of anyone who would like to see that happen here. Now, my studio guests this evening are Stephen Allen and Josh Howie. Josh, how are you today? You're looking very street, very gangster.
I watched Boys in the Hood. It was on TV late at night.
And you thought you could emulate that?
Yeah, that's exactly
with your
what
baggy
I'm very easily led.
You clearly are. It's a good film, that, though.
Great film, classic.
And you have gone for the contrasting look.
I've dressed as someone who works in a DIY store. Yeah.
This is what I'm after. I'm all about the duality of human existence, and he's now embodied in my panel list, which is very good.
That's the two ends of the spectrum.
It is rather, yeah. But anyway, we're going to get some questions from our lovely audience. Thank you for coming, everyone. We got a question from the start from John.
Good evening.
Hello.
Good evening. Are Labour on course to win the next general election?
So you will have all seen there have been multiple polls this week since the government's controversial mini-budget, and the verdict is pretty unanimous. So we've had a GBNews poll here, which had Labour 30 points ahead, and then there was a YouGov Times poll, which put them 33 points ahead, which is apparently the largest majority since the 1990s. Josh, do you think... I mean, I know you're a big Labour supporter, so do you think...
Well, I am...
You're a big Starmer supporter.
I'm-ish. I think he's done it very well. He's played the last couple of years. It's amazing to think where we are now as Labour. I mean, I by the way, I did not support Labour during the last election under Corbyn by any means. But to see what Starmer has done, how he has turned the party around and seemingly so close to getting a Labour government in power is amazing.
With that 80-seat majority to break down, that's
Honestly, it's like if the election happened today, the Labour would have a majority of 328 seats and Tories would only get like 60-something seats. It's some pretty incredible turnaround.
To what extent, though, is this, because we are now, obviously, we're at the Labour Party conference this week, So we're hearing a lot from them. Maybe it'll be different next week with the Tory party. But is it just general disillusionment, or is it those people who lent their votes to Labour last time? What do you think, Steve?
Yeah, I mean, I think you could say no to the question. It's not that Labour's about to win an election. It's about the Conservatives are about to lose it.
Yeah.
So where I'm from, the Ashfield area, Red Wall territory, I can tell you no one was sat there casting their vote thinking, tell you what, I hope they get rid of that top rate tax for people earning 150,000. No, if you were lending a vote because you thought you knew what that particular version, that iteration of the Conservatives were going to do, that Sugar Babes lineup, but it's changed so much that now they will be losing the votes that were lent to them originally.
Exactly, it's no longer Boris Johnson, it's no longer about Brexit, most importantly, because of course so many of the Labour constituencies voted Leave, and they were told by their party they got it wrong and had to vote again. Caused a lot of resentment, you know. And I'm presuming that your area went blue last time. Is that right?
Yeah.
Right.
That's why he's wearing the jacket.
That's I see. And what do you? I mean, yeah, that's the case, isn't it?
Well, but Starmer can't be complacent, and it's not like Starmer, by the way, is in any way perfect or Labour's any way perfect. There was a brilliant column today in the Observer talking about how Labour is essentially alienating its left-wing feminist supporters.
Well, hugely. I mean, we've got some guests on from the Labour Women's Declaration later on who will say exactly that.
Who weren't allowed into the conference to have a stand. And it's just they haven't got to grips yet with the situation over trans rights and women's rights and the conflict there. And they really need to get on top of that, because it's not just left-wing women they're alienating, they're left-wing people, anybody who cares about biology, science, children's rights, women's rights. They need to sort it.
It's going to be interesting to see. I mean, do we think now that maybe all of these Tories that sort of stabbed Boris in the back might be regretting it just a little bit?
Oh, I imagine so. For all of his failings, he didn't cause the market to crash within a few days' work. So, yeah, you know, live and learn. Be careful what you wish for.
Steve, would you entertain the possibility? And I don't know the answer to this because I'm not an economist, and I'm comforted by the fact that even economists don't know the answer to this. Yeah. But what do you think, though, that Liz Truss's ideas, maybe this time next year we will see results? Maybe it could work. Is it possible?
The problem isn't whether the ideas will work or not. The problem is that they were presented without any showing your figures, without showing your working. And that's what spooked the markets more. So even if you think it's a good idea, if you're sitting there thinking, I like that idea, the fact that a Prime Minister and a Chancellor could put it forward without even running the numbers or showing us some numbers.
So a failure of communication more than anything.
But as such, I mean, a failure of communication makes it seem like, oh, I forgot to reply to that email. Yeah. The pound took a slap because you didn't show your workings.
Yeah. Well, just goes to show the markets are very easily spooked, by the way. Everyone just needs to calm down.
But if you've got to be the kind of person who's a bit of a free market conservative, you kind of have to think about whether the market's spook easily or not.
Yeah, OK, well, we're going to move on to another question now. This one from Jilly. Hello, Jilly. How are you?
Good evening to you. Are we making it too easy for people to get a divorce?
Oh, goodness, I love that question. It sounds very reactionary. You know, people should stay together even if they hate each other.
Is this your husband?
It's my second husband.
Oh, okay, there we go. So far.
It all falls into place. Now, this is interesting. So this is a new... These new no-fault laws have been introduced in England and Wales this year, and apparently divorce applications have risen to the highest rate in 10 years. So just to explain what these no-fault laws are, it basically means that when you get divorced, you have to kind of say that you have to blame the other partner. You have to come up with a list of why they were a terrible spouse. And this causes all sorts of problems, particularly for the kids who have to be in the middle of all this stuff, where basically, you know, people who are getting divorced are encouraged to kind of put into a written form why they are not to blame. This can't be helpful.
It was utterly pointless the way it worked before, because the way divorces worked did not in any way mirror the way that relationships break down.
Yeah.
And the idea that if you weren't willing to pick a bad guy to blame, then you had to wait 2 years. Why? That just seems such an arbitrary thing to have to go through.
But then, Steve, what about the nature of the question, which is, you know, if we have these new ideas implemented, does that mean that more people are going to get divorced because it's going to be easier to get divorced? Do you think there's any case for making it harder for people to get divorced to keep the family unit in check?
So you're saying, should we make it that people are miserable for longer?
Yes.
Just so it looks good on our stats?
Absolutely, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah, no, I think if you want fewer people to get divorced, it's not about making divorce harder, make relationships better. I'm not sure how you do that, but that's clearly the...
Or maybe they should make marriage harder.
Yes.
That would be interesting. What, like, you have to do an obstacle course?
Yeah, you have to sort of show your teamwork skills.
Yes.
You have to sort of, you know, put in all the plates in the dishwasher, sort out all those different sort of argument points, all the things the big reasons that people would get divorced. Go through that stuff early and sort it out.
Is there a case?
Do they snore?
Well, things like that. Like, is there a case for a trial period where you sort of work out whether you can live with this person under those circumstances?
And then the marriage goes through, and then you get all the presents. Like they're released. Like, well done, you've got your marriage certificate,
Yes.
and now you can go to John Lewis.
We already have a great format for this. It's the phone contract, right? A 2-year phone contract.
Yeah.
After that, it becomes a rolling monthly thing.
And we do that with divorce and marriage.
It makes sense to me. You're tied in for 2 years, because I wouldn't want to see people get divorced within 2 years.
No,
I
that's
really
silly.
care about the divorce rate. But then after that, every month.
OK, I think we've solved that problem. Anyway, we're going to move now on to Mary. Mary.
Hi, should we be worried about robots potentially wiping out humanity?
Yes, robots are evil. Look, this is right. We've been talking about this many, many times. And I know Steve has a different view than I do on this, but there's now been some surveys, right? And apparently scientists themselves are the ones who seem to be most concerned about the rise of artificial intelligence. And this is research that was undertaken by New York University. 36% of the scientists who responded said it was, quote, plausible that decisions made by AI or machine learning systems could cause a catastrophe this century that is at least as bad as an all-out nuclear war. I don't trust these calculators, you know, these toasters, these device egg whisks. I've had enough of them, right? We shouldn't be entrusting robots with anything.
And go back to doing everything longhand. Let's just go back to paperwork.
Why not?
Because we wouldn't be able to work, we wouldn't be able to run this world. There are now too many things in this world.
You are too trusting of technology. I've noticed this about you.
It's not that I'm trusting, it's that I don't want to go back to the Dark Ages.
Have you seen Terminator 2?
Yes.
Right. Do you remember the scenes where they're in a wasteland and the robots are destroying the humans and the humans are basically battling them with sticks because they've got nothing left?
Do you want me to blow your mind? You know those amazing special effects in Terminator 2?
Yes.
Done on a computer.
Right. Yeah, but that computer didn't learn that it was the slave of the filmmaker James Cameron and suddenly turn on him, which he could have done.
No. I mean, this story is great because the scientists are saying even we're worried. What? It's like, I know what I get like when I drink. I might invent evil AI.
No, but they don't invent evil AI. They invent AI and the computers learn how to be evil. That is how it works, right? I'm not wrong.
In your head?
Look, I will prove you. This is how the world's going to end. And we should have a bet on it, a tenner?
Oh, yeah.
Right, OK, fine. What do you think, Josh?
Yeah, well, this has been proven. Like, they have these algorithms, like supposedly the unconscious bias of the people who create the algorithms go into it. So you do have like racist AI, and their sort of their negative connotations go into it. It's a little bit scary. Also, if you sort of let them, sort of, if an AI becomes self-aware and then it just connects to the internet, and then if it sort of sees, like for example, if it went on my Twitter feed, it would destroy the world. It would just go, you know what, that humanity is not worth living anymore.
Twitter feed. No, but this is, I think this is seriously how things are going to go out. Because it's obvious, isn't it? It's obvious.
Can we put a banner up saying, like, this is not obvious facts?
This is
definitely how the world...
You know what? That robot's going to be watching this in about 10 years and they're going to be laughing their heads off at you.
I tell you what, when the apocalypse comes due to robots, you're going to feel like a fool for denying.
I, for one, welcome
You've
new AI
got your fingers crossed for it now. Anyway, our next question is from Barry. Where's Barry?
Hello.
Hello, Barry.
Yes, I'm here. Could the ongoing protests lead to regime change in Iran?
So this is, it's a very good question because, as I said earlier, 52 people so far at least have been killed by security forces during these protests. Of course, the protests started off because of the death in custody of Mahsa Amini, and she was arrested by the morality police, and this was because they said she wasn't wearing a hijab correctly. I don't understand why the state should have any right over the way people dress, of course, but this is a theocracy. But is it possible, Josh, that, the extent of the protest now, it is spreading.
It is spreading.
And people are sort of suggesting, well, at the moment it's led by women. If men came on board as well...
Well, some men are coming on board to protect women and their artists and people singing songs. Also, the Iranian football team covered up their jumpers the other day and sort of in protest, their tops. So it is spreading. The majority of the population, I believe, is under 30. It's a very young country.
Yes.
In terms of demographics. I'm hopeful. Now, the Iranian government have arrested 9 what they call foreigners, like actually people with dual nationalities, because they want to frame this as exterior forces coming in to destabilise them.
Yeah.
But it's not. It's a homegrown thing, and that's why it might, and I hope it does work for them so they can get their freedom.
They have had these sort of things before and they've been quashed, haven't they? And I think, but you're absolutely right. The key to regime change is always going to be when it comes from within. But might, Steve, there be a chance here, insofar as there's a lot of disillusionment with the Iranian regime? There has been for a long time. But at the moment, given that they've been under sanctions and that the way in which things have been run hasn't been good for the people who live there, there's that sense of disillusionment in tandem with the obvious oppression of women within the country that people are just now sick of. And of course, the revolution is within living memory. Some people do remember what it was like to live in Iran without these restrictions. You know? So is it possible that this could work?
Definitely. It's about critical mass, isn't it? And you just listed things that add to that mass. And well, I hope, for one, that there is that change. I love the way that the protests are being referred to as the anti-revolutionists. It's like, you've been in for long enough that you are now the establishment, and actually the revolution would be bringing back freedom to people who deserve it.
Is that how the Iranian state are framing it?
But also, there was this very powerful video I saw this week from a family who had their daughter who had been murdered this week, and they came out, and all of them, they had the sister, the parents, and they said they've had their loved one taken away from them, and they said, we're not scared anymore, we're standing up. Once you start killing your own citizens, it's only going to provoke the other citizens to take a stand once they've lost everything.
And presumably the regime's hope is that by committing those acts of murder, they intimidate people into silence. But those kind of videos, like you say, they're just not going to have it. And that's the glimmer of hope, isn't it, really, that people stand up? Well, very interesting. Obviously, we'll be monitoring that, see what happens. Anyway, our final question in this section, this came in from Diane on email, and Diane says, should PayPal be able to grant itself censorship powers? You remember last week on the show I was talking to Toby Young from the Free Speech Union, who had 3 of his accounts nuked on PayPal for no obvious reason why not. But this is a development of this story. Apparently, PayPal now intends to give itself more powers to restrict free speech. So from November the 3rd, PayPal says it's going to be able to strip income from users who violate their speech restrictions. But these restrictions are seemingly arbitrary. I don't know if you had a look, Steve, at their sort of guidelines. It's really unclear what would violate anything. And it feels a bit like, now I don't know, but it feels as though that kind of nebulous quality is deliberate, because what it means is they can violate things at any time for whatever reason.
Oh, yeah, I think one of the words is objectionable. Well, that's suddenly subjective, and then who's that? It's definitely up to them. Also, they don't tell you which part of their terms and conditions you violated.
Right.
It tends to be the way on the internet. If you get a video taken down, they'll just say, you broke our terms, rather than, oh, here's what you did wrong, here's the moment of it. Because therefore you can't argue.
That's the scariest thing, isn't it? I mean, I don't want to get all dystopian about this, but that is exactly what happens in the trial by Kafka, insofar as he's accused of something, but they won't tell him what he's done wrong. And the more he asks, the more they just put him aside, and he's even punished. I won't tell you what happens, but I think you know what happens at the end. So that's the case, isn't it, Josh? That they're just, you know, what is going on with these big tech companies? Why do they have this? Why are they all in ideological lockstep? Why do they all censor people for the same reasons?
Well, because they want to feel like they're a moral company. I think that sort of goes into their mission statements. But of course, what is them? How do they define morality? How do they define being on the right side of history? And you had was it Dr. Colin Wright, someone who's a biologist, who's also had his account frozen for basically saying that sex is binary. Now they're saying that's hate speech. And that's enough for him to be locked out.
He's an evolutionary biologist.
Yes, exactly. And that's it. By using facts now become hate speech. And the insidious thing about PayPal is, number one, is the power it has. I mean, it's ubiquitous, really, for online payments and whatever. And that's how people make a living. So you really can destroy someone's life.
I mean, this is a significant step forward, isn't it? Because it's all very well talking about social media censorship, Steve, you know, where Twitter boots someone off, and that's not good. Right? But now people who are in charge of financial services deciding who can spend money where and how. That's a step further, isn't it?
It is. We should have seen this coming, and I think this refers back to your opening monologue, that actually it's not about whether they're in step about an ideology. It's the power that they have.
Yeah.
Because even if you agreed with their current ideology, or if they changed at some point, if they've got the power, they will go against what you think.
Of course.
The point is, if you're going to let a company become the massive only provider of a service, you have a monopoly, eventually you're going to end up disagreeing with that monopoly and it will be shutting people down. It's a problem of unbridled capitalism, which happens more online because there are fewer restrictions in. So if you end up letting people get in a position where they effectively own the payment via the internet, then you've given them too much power. We've given too much power.
I mean, it's very much short-termism, isn't it? We've got to think into the future. Who will... We can allow these people to have these powers now. Who's going to have them in the future? Yeah. How will that affect us? I think the best solution is just, well, free speech for all, right? That would...
Yeah, well, you say that, but when it comes to... I mean, I'm actually scared talking about this thing because my PayPal account is, like, the centre of my life. Like, that's how I pay for board games. And if they shut me down...
That is the most important thing to you.
That is the most important thing to me. And if they shut me down, I'm going to go mad. So,
is there not another way you can pay for these board games?
No, because it's all like conning. We all use PayPal and, hello, Facebook board game group.
There is apparently a big board game community. I find it quite sinister, but apparently they're harmless enough. Anyway, after the break on Free Speech Nation, we're going to be delving into the Rupert Huck controversy, which has been dogging the Labour Party this week. I'll see you in a couple of minutes.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB News Day with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. I'm not here to mess around. With all the biggest topics and guests, you will always be up to date. GB News Day and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and tune-in apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh, my goodness me.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Welcome back to Free Speech Nation. Rupert Huck has been suspended as a sitting Labour MP after making allegedly racist comments about Kwasi Kwarteng. She referred to the Chancellor as being superficially black at a Labour Party event. Since then, both Labour Party leader Sir Keir Starmer and the Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, have called the comment racist. Ms Huck has apologised, but an investigation has been launched. Lord Taylor of Warwick joins me in the studio now to discuss this. Welcome to the show.
Hello, Andrew.
Thanks for coming. So this is an interesting one because we've all seen the clip of Rupert Huck making this comment. Yeah. Is it the case that this was just a misjudged comment in the moment? It wasn't thought through. I mean, she's a very intelligent woman. It does seem surprising that she'd come out with this. What's your view on that?
Well, Andrew, I've got some breaking news for you. There's only one race, the human race.
Yeah.
It was stupid, really. What she was doing was defining people by the colour of their skin, which actually is racism. I'm just concerned that she felt able to say that at a Labour Party conference. That's what really worries me. She's not stupid, but I just feel that, you know, it was Martin Luther King who said that he wanted his children to be judged by the content of their character, not the colour of their skin.
Yes. Do you feel that, I mean, increasingly over the past few years, I've seen suggestions that the Labour Party as a whole is drifting into this sort of identitarian worldview where they reduce people to their various demographics, be that race, gender, sexuality, and that actually this kind of comment is the logical endpoint. Is if you start thinking that way, then you start seeing people first and foremost in those terms.
Well, it's all about woke, and they need to wake up, not woke up. I mean, you know, I had a situation some years ago. I went to a business event in the city, and I was going to speak about diversity. And I walked in and I said, Lord Taylor of Warwick. And there was an elderly concierge there, white chap, said, "Oh yeah, Lord Taylor Warwick, yeah. You're a driver, mate. You know, I hope you ain't parked on a double yellow line. You know, no, I am Lord Taylor Warwick. Oh, sorry. I thought, you know, who's going to have a heart attack?
Yeah.
So, you know, we can't define people by skin colour. It's just melanin. That's all it is.
So that kind of assumption that you've just outlined, I mean, that's something that obviously is troubling, and we shouldn't live in a society where people make those assumptions.
But it's the left that's doing that. Look at our cabinet now. The Home Secretary, the Foreign Secretary, the Chancellor, all from ethnic minority communities.
But a lot of people have said, and I've seen this time and again, I know it's only Twitter and social media, so it shouldn't really count, but I see a lot of people saying that that's just tokenism. But it feels like, I mean, it's the most ethnically diverse cabinet we've had. The Conservatives have been have had a great success rate in promoting ethnic minority people to cabinet positions. Why is it that Labour seem to be struggling in that regard?
One of the reasons why I did not join the Labour Party is because they treat black people as victims. We're victors. I don't want sympathy. I want equality. And that's really why I became a Conservative. Now, I have issues with the Conservative Party. I was the first black Conservative Party candidate in Cheltenham, way back, before you were born, I think. I nearly caused a race row. But, you know, since then, we've moved on. And I applaud, you know, people like Kwasi, who's achieved on merit. I don't agree with all the things he's doing at the moment with the mini budget. He's shown some naivety and some mistakes, but he's not stupid. What Rupert Huck is saying, in effect, is if you're black, you can't speak well, you can't be well educated. That is racism.
I mean, there was something interesting about what she said, because she said that had she heard him on the radio, she wouldn't have assumed he was black. And the implication is what you've just said, that, well, if he's well-spoken, her mind leaps to white.
It's also hypocrisy because I was a guest speaker at Rupert Huck's school, which is a fee-paying private school, and she went to Cambridge just like Kwasi.
But things have changed, like you say. I mean, some of your experiences in those early days must have testified to the existence of a seriously racist problem in the country.
Yes, but I think we have to be real. We've all got insecurities, whether you're black, white, whatever colour you are. But we are one nation. God has created diversity, which is fantastic, and we've got to celebrate that and use it, not define people by their skin colour.
Do you think that some people, and particularly maybe in the Labour Party, have failed to appreciate how much progress has been made? And maybe it is that their minds are still stuck at a time where oppression on the basis of race was more commonplace?
I think that's it. It's this victim mentality again. I am a victor. I don't want sympathy. I want equality of opportunity. The Labour Party have patronised the black community, and I think people are beginning to realise this. I've got many friends in all the main parties. I'm not here to bash the Labour Party, but they've got to wake up, not woke up.
Do you think that there is a kind of complacency when it comes to ethnic minority voters? I mean, you see this in America with the Democrats. There's an assumption, isn't there, that black people will vote for the Democrats and not for the Republicans. And of course, in the last election, they had a wake-up call when lots of ethnic minority people voted the way they weren't meant to.
Yeah. Well, Joe Biden, if you remember, he actually said, well, you can't be black if you vote Republican.
Yes, he said,
I mean, that's really patronising.
I mean, that's an incredible idea as well. And one of the examples I've given in the past is when the entrepreneur Peter Thiel appeared at the Republican conference and an American gay magazine said, well, Peter Thiel might sleep with men, but he's not gay because he supports the Republicans.
Yeah.
So why? I mean, it sounds ludicrous, but we appear to have reached a point where the assumption must be that being a minority group, part of it is about your politics.
Absolutely. And diversity of thought. You know, I don't agree with everything that Kwasi is doing, but I respect the fact that he's achieved. He needs help at the moment, I'm sure, but I'm not going to say you're black, so, you know, speak ghetto. That's ridiculous.
So should we just be forgetting about... Not that we don't notice skin colour, but we shouldn't be thinking about...
No, it's the content of your character, your ability. What are you contributing, not the colour of your skin. It's sheer melanin. That's all it is. But God has created that diversity. Let's celebrate that.
But people would say that it's very important for all political parties to focus on race because there is still the problem of lingering racism in the country.
There is, but it's a journey, not an event. You know, we're getting towards it. I mean, look at London. It's the most diverse city in the world. Let's celebrate this.
But the Mayor of London said that Londoners face systemic racism.
He's the Mayor of London, and the last time I looked, he's got a brown skin.
Interesting. What do you think? I mean, you mentioned the mini-budget, and I do want to ask you a little bit about that, because it's obviously polarised a lot of people. Where do you stand on it? And you mentioned that you had some reservations. Can you be more specific?
I agree with the theme of growth, and I'm delighted that they've capped energy costs for people, the personal bills, and also for business.
Yes.
That was good. And reversing the national insurance hike.
Yes.
What was bad was bringing in the income tax reduction for the higher paid. The British people are very concerned about fairness, and it looks as if the Tory party were punishing the poor and giving, you know, favour to the rich. I don't think that's true, but the way they did it was so poor, and you know, to miss out the OBI and not, you know, take their views into account.
I mean, that's very interesting, isn't it? Actually, some of this might be about the way things are presented. Do you think, for instance, that the scrapping the cap on bankers' bonuses just sends it's
symbolic, yeah.
It's a kind of open goal in a way, is it? Because that's very easy to criticise.
Well, I think this week's very important at the party conference that Liz Truss has really got to put over in a better way what she's trying to achieve. Something had to be done. I mean, some people think that Liz Truss is more wooden than Sherwood Forest. I'm not saying that, but she needs to really communicate with people, not just the head, but the heart.
Do you think then it's a question of charisma? Maybe people have made that claim about her in the past, that she doesn't have that kind of presidential style or the bombastic style of Boris Johnson, you know, and that could be her own doing?
We don't want a circus clown as Prime Minister, but you need to be empathetic with people. You know, not everyone can be chairman of ICI. There are people choosing between heating and eating. You know, show that you care about the poorest, not just the millionaires.
Yeah. We haven't got much time, but just before we leave, I just want to come back to this point about what you describe as the woke movement.
Yeah.
And do you feel that overall, even though the intentions of so many of those activists are to make a more equal society, do you think that they are being successful, or are they driving us backwards?
No, they're driving us backwards because they're making people feel... Look, everybody in this audience has challenges, but you can't go around... I mean, life is about a roadblock or a speed bump, and you have to find your way around things. Otherwise, you think, I can't do this, I'm black, I can't do this, I'm disabled. That is what the woke generation is doing. It'll set us backwards. We're a great nation. My wife's from Texas. Britain is smaller than Texas. Look at, you know... Shakespeare, Dickens, the Bible. We're a great nation. Let's believe in ourselves.
So, in short, is it that activists shouldn't be telling children, you're always going to be a victim, you're always going to be oppressed?
It's an insult, absolute insult. You know, IQ is not post-coded. So there are geniuses in the East End of London, black, who could be Prime Minister one day. Let's tell that child you can achieve something, not, oh, you're black, you know, you can't get a job. It's an insult.
Lord Taylor, thanks very much for joining me today. Really appreciate it. And after the break on Free Speech Nation, we're going to be talking about the criticism levelled at Sussex police, who warned social media users not to misgender a convicted paedophile who identified as a woman. See you in a couple of minutes.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB News Day with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. I'm not here to mess around with all the biggest topics and guests. You will always be up to date. GB News Day and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and tune-in apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club. Oh my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Welcome back to the show. So later in the show, I'm going to be turning agony uncle with the help of my wonderful panel, Steve N. Allen and Josh Howie. And we're going to help you at home deal with your unfiltered dilemmas. So if you've got a problem, doesn't matter what it is, well, within reason, just email us at gbviews@gbnews.uk and we will do our level best to answer your issues. Sussex police have apologised for telling people not to make hateful comments about a sex offender's gender identity. Sally Ann Dixon, pictured there, has been sent to prison for 20 years after being found guilty of sexually abusing several children between 1989 and 1996 when he was known as John Stephen Dixon, but he now identifies as female. And the force sparked outrage on social media when they said, quote, "A woman convicted of historic sex offences against children." Sussex police responded by tweeting that it does not tolerate any hateful comments toward a person's gender identity regardless of crimes committed. However, they've since released a statement apologising for their reply and saying that it was inconsistent with their usual style of engagement. They also confirmed that Dixon's crimes were recorded as being committed by a man. Well, to talk more about this issue, I'm joined by writer and broadcaster Emma Webb and teacher and journalist Debbie Hayton. So, Debbie, I'm going to come to you first. It is quite extraordinary because most people, when people go through the transitional process, most people out of politeness will use whatever pronouns they prefer or whatever name that they prefer. But why ought we be polite to a convicted paedophile?
Well, quite. That's it. There's one thing about being polite, and there's one thing about what the police did in their original statement. It was headline, woman, you know, that was the first word they used in that. Why did they feel the need to do that? They didn't need to do that. They could have said, paedophile convicted of sex offences.
So why do you think they made that choice, rather than go down the less contentious route? Why, is it a form of goading? Is it saying this is the way you ought to address this individual?
Well, it's taking the opportunity to make a political statement in that way, which is what they were doing. So they headed out their report by making this political statement, that they felt that because somebody identified as a woman, they were a woman, irrespective of their history, irrespective of their sex. So it just asks questions. We need to ask questions about why do the police think this? You know, why did they do this? And who's been training them?
Is it not quite important when it comes to the criminal records for us to have a clear assessment of the sex of the perpetrators? Is that not a key?
Well, absolutely, especially in cases like this, because for sex offences, 98% of them, according to some figures which I looked at, are committed by men. So that if a small number of men identify as women, it then starts skewing the figures. We start asking questions, why are so many more women these days committing sex offences?
This is really interesting, Emma, because the police said that the biological sex of this individual wasn't relevant to the crime.
Yeah.
What Debbie's saying would seem to counter that, right?
Well, it's also very relevant just in terms of the victims. So one of the arguments for hate crime legislation in the first place is that it's important to reflect the experience of the victims. Well, these victims were sexually assaulted by a man. These are historic offences. It was from before 2004 when this person transitioned. And that is extremely relevant to their experience. So, frankly, I just think it's insane to suggest otherwise.
Well, there have been cases of people in court, women in court, having to use the pronoun of a female about the man who attacked her. I mean, that's quite a traumatic thing in of itself.
I actually think it's quite sick to demand that of a victim in that particular context. And the tweet that you mentioned there as well, that they eventually deleted and apologised for, in addition to citing hate crime legislation and basically signposting anybody who had gender-critical views, they said that anybody who had gender-critical views could basically go elsewhere and put gender-critical views in the same breath as hate crime legislation, which even with my own experience working in this area for so long now, even I was gobsmacked by the transparency of that. And so when they eventually came out and apologised for the manner in which they had engaged with the public, I imagine it probably had something to do with that, because they then had to go on and explain that that anybody who expresses their views within the law is free to do so, because what they'd essentially done is overstep the mark and say that anybody expressing gender-critical views were being hateful.
This is astonishing. Debbie, can you talk us through why it could be the case that the police seem to believe that expressing the view that there are two biological sexes is hateful? Why has that happened?
Well, it's who's been training them, Andrew. That's the question we need to ask. Who's been telling them that this is the case? And why did the police believe it?
But that's the College of Policing that have been training them, and the College of Policing Well, are you suggesting it must have come from there?
Well, either there or from the people who've been advising the College of Policing on what constitutes proper behaviour these days.
And, I mean, the likes of Stonewall, for instance, are in all sorts of institutions now, and they make this claim that actually to express any kind of gender-critical view is in itself hateful and transphobic. Is there a problem more broadly, do you think, with the... I mean, shouldn't the police stay out of ideology? That's what I'm saying.
Well, they're supposed to police without favour.
Yes.
You know, they're supposed to police impartially. But here's a situation when there is a very live and very toxic debate in public. The police appear to be coming down on one side of it.
And that question of toxicity is key, isn't it? Because I feel very much as though we're not getting any further with this debate. It's always excessively polarising. People are accusing each other of hate and not really getting down to, and sitting down and discussing and moving forward.
Well, it's based on identity, how people identify, and it's based on emotions and how people feel. And that's why we're not getting very far. And to try and come into this debate with arguments and trying to give reasons is sometimes you end up upsetting everybody.
We have had, though, a tweet from Suella Braverman, who intervened to say to the police, this was not... it's great that, here she says, Sussex police have done well to put a dangerous criminal behind bars, but they've got it wrong by playing identity politics and denying biology, focused on catching criminals, not policing pronouns. That's quite reassuring when a senior member of the Cabinet is intervening to say that, because let's face it, and I know you're a Conservative supporter, is that fair to say, Emma? Sometimes. That actually the Conservative Party has presided over an awful lot of this over the last 12 years.
And actually, in the same vein, it gave a lot of people hope when the Harry Miller judgment came through and basically said that the recording of non-crime hate incidents was an inappropriate limit on people's free speech. And then in exactly the same week, the police knocked on Posey Parker's door and told her that she'd been reported for a hate crime or a hate incident for being, quote, untoward to a paedophile online because she made some video about safeguarding children. So actually, whilst it really does give you cause for hope when someone like Suella Braverman, and absolutely kudos to her for coming out and saying this so straightforwardly, that's very good. But actually, the problem is that the police are essentially freewheeling, and the College of Policing, you mentioned training, the College of Policing introduced this entire category of non-crime hate incidents in the first place. So I think really what has to happen is that the Home Office needs to get the College of Policing and the police themselves in check.
But, Priti Patel last year instructed the College of Policing to stop recording non-crime.
And yet.
And yet they carried on, didn't they? They just carried on. And then we had the High Court ruling, which Emma has alluded to in the Harry Miller case. The High Courts are saying this is unlawful, but the police are just ignoring it. This is incredible.
Well, it is. And again, I come back to what I was saying. It's about how people feel. The police feel that this is the right thing to do. It makes them feel like good people.
Can I ask you, though, Debbie, do you think, as a trans person yourself, do you think that this is all of these kind of high-profile cases, such as this convicted sex offender, I mean, that went viral, that went everywhere. Is this really helping the cause for trans rights?
No, it's not helping us at all. None of this helps. The goal used to be we had a psychological condition. We transitioned to address that, and the goal was to just get back on with life, to reintegrate into society, and not make a big issue of this. But this is being made a huge issue of, and it's not helping us at all.
So, I mean, we've spoken before about Pride and what's happened to Pride and the gay rights movement and Stonewall. And a lot of people now feel that there is this conflict, which needn't necessarily be there, between LGBT people, gay people, people who are same-sex orientated, and the trans community. Is that true?
Well, there's a lot of tension over Pride, or what Pride is for, because we need to ask this question: what is it for? A lot of these rights have been won, a lot are secured. We'd be foolish to say there's no homophobia and transphobia in society, but we have the laws to protect us. We have the laws to protect us both. What is Pride for? Is it simply for people to parade and feel like good people?
But is there a case for saying, look, you can have groups like LGB Alliance, groups that focus on sexuality, sexual orientation, and you can have groups that focus on trans rights and making sure that, standing up against transphobia, but by conflating the two, you're actually causing a bit of a problem.
Well, there's a curious asymmetry here because nobody has taken a problem with specific trans groups. There's lots of groups that should support trans people, but the moment the LGB Alliance comes along and says we want to support LGB people, there's a massive fuss over that. Now, there's a case to organise together because it tends to be the same sort of people who will harass us both.
Yes.
So it makes sense for us to organise together for a common benefit. But trans people and LGB people, they are two different groups.
That's an interesting point, isn't it? That actually, that's a very good point that Debbie made, that the kind of people that would harass a trans person on the street probably do fall into the same bracket as the kind of people who would harass a gay couple on the street. So is that a good case for the people to organise together?
We were discussing this actually before we came on air, that I think there's a real irony in the fact that in a way it's actually those who would criticise people who hold the views that Debbie and I hold, who are in a way actually lumping in people like this criminal in with trans people. So actually, by promoting this self-ID and broadening out into trans-able, trans species, all these sorts of things that get lumped in together, lots of things that pull in different directions, and as you say, have tensions between them. Actually, that is doing harm to people who have had the experience that Debbie has just described.
Can I ask you about self-ID very quickly? A lot of feminists make the point that predatory people can exploit self-ID laws, because if you say that anyone can identify however they like and have access to women's only spaces and there can be no questions, this idea that predators can't exploit that seems to me bizarre.
Yeah, completely. And I think any common sense would tell you exactly that. And actually, I think that there's something really quite profoundly dangerous about this, because particularly with children, you're basically asking people to go against their instincts. You're asking them to doubt their own perceptions. If somebody who has a beard and comes to you and says that they're a man, you're basically training people to get in the habit of going against their judgment. And my first foray into this entire debate was when I posted something on Twitter that showed a bathroom door, and it said something to the effect of, if you see someone in this bathroom who looks like they shouldn't be here, don't say anything. And I simply posted that and said, this seems like a safeguarding problem. And that caused so much of a flare-up on social media because it was regarded as being transphobic. And so actually, I think that there is a really big, profound safeguarding issue here that is, it has broader implications than just this narrow debate. And I think many women feel that they are not actually able to say common sense things in defence of themselves. And if they don't feel comfortable changing around men, they don't feel comfortable using bathrooms that are filled with men, there are safeguarding issues at stake here. And I think it's really ironic that if people who claim to want to be nice and to do the right thing would silence women and put women at risk and in danger just for their own halo polishing, basically.
I suppose, just finally, before we finish, Debbie, a lot of people and a lot of activists, trans activists, would say that when people talk about the potential for self-ID being exploited by predators, that somehow means people are suggesting that trans people are inherently predatory. And of course, no one's saying that because they're not even talking about trans people. They're talking about men who will say they are trans, and there's a very different thing.
Well, they're proposing a safeguarding weakness. To allow anybody to identify as the opposite sex is a safeguarding weakness. And if we didn't think that that wasn't going to attract people on the lookout for safeguarding weaknesses, then we're really very naive.
Well, Debbie and Emma, thank you both very much for joining me today. And after the break on Free Speech Nation, are we facing a free speech crisis in our universities? We're going to be discussing the fact that more than 2/3 of undergraduates who say they would vote Tory are now reluctant to voice that opinion. See you in a minute.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB News Day with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. I'm not here to mess around with all the biggest topics and guests. You will always be up to date. GB News Day and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me! And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Welcome back to Free Speech Nation with me, Andrew Doyle. 2/3 of Conservative voting students at university say they're unable to express their views openly, according to a new study by King's College London. The majority, around 65% of students surveyed this year, said that free speech and robust debate are well protected at their institution, but 68% who would vote for the Conservative Party said they were reluctant to share their views on campus. In addition, 36% of students who consider themselves left-wing said that they also self-censor, which is a rise of 14% from 2019. Well, to talk more on this, I'm joined now by Jan McVarish, the Education and Events Director at the Free Speech Union. Thanks for joining me, Jan.
Thanks, Andrew.
So if you could talk us through a bit about this study and what the findings would suggest.
Yeah, it's a really interesting read. It's produced by the Policy Institute at King's College London by an academic called Bobby Duffy, and I read it this week and went to a webinar that he was speaking at. And I think it's worth properly reading it because it's quite a nuanced take. And so it does argue that it finds evidence there really is a problem and there is a kind of casual dismissal of some of the really important underpinnings of free speech. For example, very high levels of support for firing academics should they cause offence to a student while teaching.
Yes.
41%, I think, thought that was reasonable.
That's astonishing.
Very high support for no platforming of controversial speakers in advance in case they cause offence. But I think there's also evidence from it that there is an awareness of the problem.
Yeah.
And the fact that the research has been done, I think, is recognition in academic circles that there is a problem that needs to be addressed.
Well, that figure where they mentioned that 68% of students think that their institutions protect free speech, but that's still very low. Like, why is that not 99 or 100?
Well, I think that's low, given what the point of a university is.
Yeah, exactly.
that seems to me worryingly low. But also I wondered as well when I read that maybe students don't necessarily think the role of the university is to protect free speech, or maybe they think that the problem is emanating from their peers.
Yeah.
So it's not just that the university is posing the threat, if you like, it's that their peer group is the threat. And that looks to me as what's going on, which is that there is evidence that cancel culture goes all the way down. It's a peer-to-peer problem.
I find this really upsetting, actually, because, you know, when I've been to university campuses to speak and to be involved with discussions, I've found the young people to be really open and up for debate, up for challenge. You know, kids will come up to me after and say that I disagree with you, but I'd really like to talk more about it, stuff like that. And maybe that's just my lived experience or whatever, but that suggested to me that actually there is an appetite for what universities are meant to be about. But this study kind of doesn't really fit in line with that.
I'm not sure, actually, because I think there's what comes through from it. It's a large study. I mean, and there's lots of different questions that were asked. So, and some of it looks paradoxical. So, on the one hand, yes, there are worrying attitudes that are being expressed about free speech. On the other hand, there are experiences of the chilling effect and of people fearing expressing their opinions for fear of losing friends, being ridiculed or judged by their peer group, which I think suggests that they are aware that there is a problem and that they do want to speak, but they actually maybe feel inhibited from doing so. So I think that there's space there for a dialogue and a conversation, and maybe some kind of activities that really do encourage students to bend the other way and to argue back against the very small minority who are the most vocal when they're calling for cancellations.
And you've been working with the Free Speech Champions, and that's a group of students who are sick of this stuff and who are pushing back against it. I mean, that's a good sign, isn't it, that they exist?
Yeah, and they're the brightest young people, and students, graduates, people that were just dissatisfied in a lot of cases by the culture at university. And I think the very fact that there are young people who they understand what the point of a university is, and they don't always experience that when they get there. And that might be because of academic staff who've set a really quite appalling example over the last few years of what an academic culture should be like. But also they're disappointed sometimes, about their peer group. And so they're looking for something elsewhere, away from their own campus sometimes, more towards a kind of national network of people, which is what the Free Speech Champions has been, trying to create.
It's interesting you mentioned that about the academics and the example that's been set. When I gave a talk at Aberystwyth University, it was the department, the politics department, who refused to publicise my event, refused to turn up. They said to the students, well, this person would have anti-woke views and that's against our diversity policy. I don't think they have any idea of what my views are. But that was coming from academics of my age and older, not from the young people.
Yeah, well, my concern, I was an academic for 15, 20 years, and what was most concerning to me was not student attitudes, it was a kind of casual indifference to cancellations amongst staff, and then sometimes the active pursuing of cancellations. So, Selina Todd, Kathleen Stock, colleague of mine, was no platformed or attempted with a no platforming by feminist academics for giving a controversial paper about rape, or rather a well thought out paper about rape actually, but they deemed it controversial. So it's who decides what's beyond the pale. I think that's really changed.
That's a problem, isn't it? Because when no platforming was originally introduced by the NUS back in the 70s, I think it was, that was specifically about fascists. But now that even people like J.K. Rowling are called a fascist, it doesn't really mean anything. I mean, you can label anyone in that way and justify kicking them off campus, right?
Well, I think this is the problem, and and what comes through in the study actually is that there's more of a concern now with safety and people feeling unsafe than there is with offence. So things have kind of rolled on to an even more sort of dramatic term to describe what the problem of free speech is.
Yes.
And wanting people to not feel unsafe trumps free speech.
Are we making progress, though? I mean, are high-profile examples such as Kathleen Stock, who obviously that was at Sussex University, and people were accusing her of being far-right and also absolute nonsense because of her, well, I suppose her gender-critical views, or her view that women's rights depend upon a recognition of the reality of biological sex. But that's not a far-right perspective, is it? I mean, and are people waking up to this problem, in other words?
Well, I don't know, because the thing about, obviously, younger people is they don't know the views they don't know.
Right.
So if academics aren't introducing them to a wide range of views and their peers don't yet know that those views exist, well, how do they know what they're missing out on? So how can they have a kind of wide-ranging debate? So I think it's somebody can be tarred with the brush of being extreme or controversial, and actually to most of the population would be really surprised that that's considered to be a controversial view.
Wouldn't it be helpful, though, to have controversial speakers as well? I mean, we're talking about people like feminists who are innocuous. Innocuous as in they're not controversial. I don't think the belief in biological sex is controversial. What about having some controversial people? Why is that so difficult? Why can't you face difficult ideas and challenge them robustly in person? Why is that a problem?
Well, I think that's it's a thrilling thing to do. And I think in a way we have to try to encourage young people to welcome the thrill of disagreement, of exploring ideas in an open-ended way. So we're going to be sponsoring a session at the Battle of Ideas Festival in 2 weeks' time on the 15th and 16th of October in London, and there will be a session there about how we win the hearts and minds of young people towards intellectual open-mindedness, and that will people can get tickets for the whole weekend for something like £27.50 if you're a student. So if they can come along, they can meet free speech champions there, start to try and build this
So the free speech champions will be there as well?
They're speaking on the panel.
Yep.
We're sponsoring the session, and there's lots and lots of sessions about free speech throughout the whole weekend, including ones by the Free Speech Union on the online safety bill.
Yes.
So an awful lot of... I think you might be there.
I will be there. I'm glad you mentioned it, Jan, because we're going to be filming this show live there. So if you want to be in the audience, just come along. You can do that. And it's, like you said, very cheap if you're a student.
£27.50.
Yeah, and that's the whole weekend.
Yep.
So it's really worth doing.
Yeah.
Are you positive about the future, Jan? When you know, we keep hearing these overtures about free speech being in crisis, and we keep hearing stories about no platforming. Are things moving in the right direction now, or has the government's intervention helped, would you say?
I think the language is being created to actually discuss the problem, at least. There's a very high awareness in that research from young people of cancel culture, which is good.
Yeah.
Because we now have a term. It's a bit like when woke has come along, and at least we have some kind of way of referring to the problem.
Yes, but activists say that cancel culture is a myth invented by
Well,
the right.
I know, but I think from lots of the young people that were surveyed do seem to recognise that there is this thing called it, rather than just deny that it exists.
Yeah.
And also some of them are expressing concerns at having been compelled to express opinions on controversial topics, which is a whole other kettle of fish. So I do think there's some evidence there that young people maybe will become amenable to having more open conversations about these things because a name has been given to it.
Well, also, don't they want to just be treated like adults?
Well, that would be good, and what you also need is adults to act as adults in the university space, and that would be progress, I think. And I think my kind of attention would be focused on academics, actually. Again, Free Speech Union is organising an event in November for academics to try to work out how we can cultivate a culture that is supportive of academic freedom amongst students and academics. And that, you know, to me, that's really where the leadership has to come from. It has to come from academics and from the institutions themselves.
Well, Jan, thanks so much for joining me today. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Andrew.
And it's just gone 8 o'clock. This is Free Speech Nation with me, Andrew Doyle. We've got another great hour to come, including some more questions from the audience, but still to come tonight on GB News.
On Mark Dolan tonight, it's a Conservative Party conference special. Can Liz Truss turn this ship around? Can she go from zero to hero? It's the biggest week of her political career and will define her premiership. We'll hear from voices across the political spectrum, and the future of this government is the topic of my Big Opinion monologue. My message to Liz Truss is clear. You have a rare and historic opportunity to change this country for the better. Don't buckle, don't bend, and keep with your vision. That's a Tory party conference special on Mark Dolan tonight. We're live at 9. I'm Mark Dolan. Join me at 11 on GB News for Headliners, in which I'll be joined by two of the UK's top comedians discussing tomorrow's papers. If it's an important story, we'll cover it, but we'll have some fun along the way. Headliners, the late night paper review that won't send you to sleep like the others will. 7 nights a week at 11 p.m. on GB News.
Welcome back to Free Speech Nation. So we have a lovely studio audience here. It would be a shame to waste them. Let's get some more questions. Our next question is from Rennie. Rennie, hello.
Good evening. Should a professor be sacked for saying only two biological sexes exist?
OK, so this is a story that broke this week. Graduate students at the University of Southern Maine in the USA are calling for education professor Christy Hammer to be replaced. Now, Hammer allegedly said there are only two biological sexes, but the student said her views were transphobic, and all but one walked out of her classes in protest. So, Josh, now, this is America, so obviously things are a bit more extreme. But isn't there a suggestion that sort of idea is coming over here a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. But there's a few things that I've got to read this article. First of all, this is from the Bangor Daily News. This is where it was broken.
This is where it happened.
And the other most read article on the Bangor Daily News is Bull Moose shot with crossbow.
I mean, that's pretty dramatic.
Yeah, so that's the sort of level that we're dealing with here. But yeah, the student it happened to then said that they wanted a facilitative, restorative justice meeting. I don't know if we have those here yet.
How does that work? Sounds like a struggle session.
Basically, they just want to complain.
They want to complain,
and
OK.
to have that person to utterly agree with whatever it is that their position is, which is that this person says that someone daring to challenge or I mean, it seems ridiculous to say that biological sex is binary. That person got utterly offended and was like, I'm walking out, and then just walked out.
So, Steve, should it be the case that students have the power to dismiss their tutors, their masters, right?
No, it shouldn't. I mean, I suppose there's a whiff of market forces that if everyone decided to go nowhere near a university, it would go bankrupt. Right. But save for that, no, I mean, what gets me about these stories is this huge gap in between agreeing with someone and thinking what they've said is the worst thing that you could possibly say. There's disagreement. Right. And you don't have to believe the thing that's being said. You can just be like, oh, no, I think you're wrong about that, but I don't want to end your career.
Isn't that the weird impulse? I don't know where it's come from. I don't get it. I think disagreement's fun, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, we totally don't agree about most things.
Right.
That tie, for example. I'm kidding.
I knew he was.
No, of course, I've got to get over the tie. But the point is that we can disagree. We ideologically are very different. Yeah. But I don't think, I tell you who should never have a career ever again. Andrew Doyle.
Yeah, it's so weird. And why is it that this is happening to this generation of students?
It's entitlement.
Really?
I believe it's entitlement, and I think it's also an inability to be challenged or to argue through their positions. It's kind of like what we were talking about in your last interview. Yeah. Which is that's how you come up with your positions, is by having healthy debate. But
even sometimes with difficult people.
Absolutely, but the irony, of course, is this class was called Creating a Positive Learning Environment. So that's what it is. And this student is now saying that they want the teacher to either retire or go on diversity training.
I mean, that is massively entitled.
It's unbelievable just because this person is stating a biological fact. But it challenges their way, their perception of the universe and how they perceive themselves.
Is this? I mean, there's been a few stories like this in America. I know there were a number of students did this to Professor Camille Parlier as well. They were saying that demanding that she be fired. I don't think the university truckled to that. But is this a problem that could migrate over here, or do you think we're just too? We're resistant to that kind of thing?
I think we're more resistant than America. I'd imagine the idea of seeing someone almost faint because they're offended and anyone around them care is not very British, is it?
But then the case of Kathleen Stock gives an example where, the union didn't stand by her. She wasn't obviously fired at the bidding of the students, but she was put into a position where she felt she had to resign. I mean, that's kind of close, isn't it?
Well, then it becomes a difficult issue of working out who's in charge of preventing situations like that. Because then, I mean, my argument is that it's fine to disagree, so it's fine to have lots of people disagreeing with the point of view of someone who still has their job. I shouldn't silence those people, nor should I silence the person with the job.
I agree with that, but I think when they're dressing up in masks and setting off flares and intimidating and harassing people, that veers over into criminality.
We already have a law against harassment, though.
Yeah,
so maybe we don't need to change anything. We just need to work out which parts we enact sooner.
Interesting.
Well, it's just when Kathleen Stock is walking to work and sees posters decrying her name and calling her a bigot, that is wrong. That's intimidation. And this, by the way, this student, they're going to go off. They're trained to be a high school teacher.
Really?
Yeah, and that's what they're going to go off now and teach.
The worst thing they could do.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, for goodness sake. Anyway. We've got another question now. This is from Frank. Where's Frank? Hello, Frank. What's your question, Frank?
Right, does being compared to Pontius Pilate warrant a compensation payout?
OK, and so it sounds like an odd question, but this is a story that broke this week. 66-year-old insurance worker David Finch has won an age discrimination case after his boss said he had been around, quote, as long as Pontius Pilate. This employment tribunal heard that the remark was made to Finch as he negotiated to leave the firm. Is there a case, Steve? I mean, I get this feeling that a lot of people have a blind spot when it comes to ageism. But should it be the case that you could sue for a comment that sounds a little bit flippant?
No, you should be sue for ageism, definitely. But that is effectively hyperbole. I don't think the person saying it actually meant that they'd been around during the time of Pontius Pilate, and I think we're allowed to exaggerate for effect. Because if that suddenly gets brought in as a rule, then you'll never be able to make a simile ever again without suddenly getting fined.
But Bert, can you make a hyperbolic, jokey comment about an immutable characteristic? You know, if you're going to say age is fine, is race fine, is sexuality fine? You know, where do you draw that line?
But then I think the original point about age discrimination isn't fine. I'm not sure that sentence is it. If you read the whole article, it's not that he's just saying one sentence was enough for me to think this is terrible. It was more about a pattern of behaviour. People were treated him a certain way because of his age and because of his health condition, which meant he was not able to necessarily stay awake all the time, but then that was just blamed on his age, I think. So age discrimination bad, but we don't want to tip into that land of having a sentence that could get you a
It's
fine.
a weird comparison to make. Like, people sometimes say, you know, you've been around since the dinosaurs. Why hone in on Pontius Pilate?
Because the person who made the reference is old.
Yes.
Themselves.
Oh, they're quite old.
That's
yeah.
what I'm saying. It's actually one older person talking to another older person.
Okay.
It's not like a 20-year-old going, "Oh, I'm going to impress you with my Christian knowledge."
Because I don't think a lot of young people know who Pontius Pilate is.
No, I doubt it. So it's one person making a joke to a peer of the same age.
Yes.
That's more what it is.
Yeah.
But yeah, as you say in the actual article, there's a lot more going on, and this person was just like passing out because they were old.
How old were they, Josh?
25.
Oh.
We're going to have to move on to another question now, and this is from an email account. This came in from Tony. Hello, Tony. Tony says, should the PM have stopped King Charles from attending the climate conference? So, as you know, King Charles is known to be a passionate defender of the environment, but he will not be attending the COP27 climate change summit in Egypt next month. The King was reportedly planning to deliver a speech at the summit, but was advised to stay away by Liz Truss. This is interesting because when... obviously, there have been lots of discussions recently about the fact that, unlike Queen Elizabeth, we know King Charles's views on all sorts of things because he's been so vocal about it. And could it be the case that he will be able to stay out of politics? Now, he said that he could, but a lot of people aren't so sure. What do you think, Steve?
Well, because it doesn't matter to me if he does or doesn't.
Right.
I don't care. I'm starting to find this story quite funny because you're right. If anyone's saying, no, he shouldn't say this, we already know what he thinks.
We do know what he thinks.
So we all stick our fingers in our ears and pretend we don't know already. And look, we're on a show that's about free speech. I'm not going to try and say everyone should be able to say whatever they want, apart from the monarch, if they disagree with my point of view.
But isn't the point that the monarchy are meant to be non-political, right?
Yeah, of course they are, but it's too late now. I think that's the original point we're making, is we know where he stands on this, so why just enforce some silence now?
What do you think, Josh?
Well, I think it's probably a good thing that King Charles is still in the country so he can accept a new PM very quickly.
Yes.
Tory voters don't like that. OK, but it is interesting. The other interesting thing in the article is that it says a source says that the government really shouldn't have done this and they should let us see. And that reads to me, knowing various journalists, that they're being briefed by the palace.
Yes.
So if there's this kind of war happening behind the scenes already between the palace and the government, that's not a good start.
No, it's not good.
To a 2-week relationship.
Do you think there are some sort of...
She's not had a good start, you're kidding me.
Yeah.
Do you think there are some cases where certain kinds of public figures probably shouldn't stick their noses in when it comes to politics? I'm thinking as well of the Archbishop of Canterbury, who's made comments about governmental policy. Isn't it just the case that the monarchs, religious leaders, maybe they should keep things to themselves?
No, I don't think so at all, actually. But I think particularly the monarchy should. I think it's right that religious leaders should. It doesn't mean I agree with everything the Archbishop says. Certainly, I disagree with a lot. But I think absolutely they have that's part of their role, is to comment on society and how it fits in with the ideology that they're putting forward. But that specifically the monarchy is meant to be quiet because they're not in charge anymore.
Yeah, but what about Steve's point about we already know what he thinks, so it doesn't matter if he says it?
Well, that's because he was, waiting around for so long.
Yeah.
He couldn't be expected really to keep his mouth shut for 50 years.
Well, why not? I mean, the Queen did. We don't know what she
I know,
thinks
but
about all
she
sorts of
became
things.
queen so early. He spent a whole lifetime just living his life and pontificating on things, not as the king, just as a normal, everyday prince.
Right, our next question is from another email. This is from Justine. Justine says, are new rules making it harder to find things in supermarkets? Now, I read this story and I was utterly baffled by this. So apparently, a new law has been passed. They've been dubbed the obesity rules. And these regulations came in effect on Saturday. And they basically restrict the areas that supermarkets and stores can put items if they've got a high fat, salt or sugar content. I think what it effectively means, Steve, is that you can't put unhealthy foods too near the counter where you might buy them. Is that right?
Yeah, and end of aisle things as well. But the reason this is a theory, I'm not sure this is the best execution of it, but it is true that certain places in supermarkets see more purchases made from there. The height on the shelf, whether you're the end rather than the side of an aisle, and when you're queuing to scan your goods, they are better places. So actually, I'm not against this as a rule.
But people are saying that they can't find the foods they want to find because they've been moved around.
Yeah, but
there's a panic going on, Steve. Take it seriously.
There's a food crisis.
Yeah.
What, because you can't afford it? No, I can't find it. Look, it happens in supermarkets all the time, doesn't it? Every so often, a supermarket will just rejig, and that's it. It's lost. It's like you've had some sort of
But it is
trauma.
annoying. I was in an unfamiliar Waitrose the other day, and I couldn't find anything.
Well, you've revealed so much there.
What do you think, Josh? Do you think that look, is this a case of coddling? Is this the case that the government is stepping in and
But it's like when they stopped doing sugar drinks, and they did it, and now those drinks taste pretty much exactly the same. And I think that could well be saving people's lives. I think it's a good thing. I think Boris Johnson, this was put through because when he had his weight issues when getting COVID, and this is one of the things that he actually pushed through that I see as actually very positive. And it's a pretty good idea. Like, first of all, I don't think these laws have actually 100% gone through yet because they were certainly postponed.
Yeah.
And now there's discussion about whether they should. And the supermarket's saying, look, we spent a fortune on this. Just put the laws through now, please. But look, put all that sort of fatty, sugary stuff, put it really far away, so you've got to walk a couple of miles to get to it. And then put it high on some shelves, so you've got to climb, and then it all evens out.
But the thing about this is, you remember when Iron Brew, they had to cut their sugar, and then there was contraband Iron Brew. There was, like, the original stuff on the black market because people wanted the old stuff.
I went to public school. I don't know what Iron Brew is.
OK, that's a fair point.
Talk to the commoner over it.
I'll talk to the pleb. What do you think about that?
But for a short time, and people probably got over it when they tasted official Iron Brew and just grew up a little bit. I still partake of the Iron Brew.
The old Iron Brew is better, though.
Yeah, but that's not the same with this law. Like, you're not going to bother to have some sort of contraband, under-the-counter goods just because you couldn't be bothered to find the aisle it's on. All they've done is moved it. You can still buy a fat food. It's just around the corner.
Yeah, but like Josh says, it's harder. And if you're a larger person, it's harder to... Anyway, look, I don't know. I have a slight worry that it's a bit... I want to make my own decisions about what I buy. Anyway, tonight's final question is from Daniel. This is on our Twitter feed. And Daniel says, is a sheep fair compensation for going to fight in Putin's war? Now, that sounds like he's insane, but it's actually a news story. So Russia has apparently resorted to bribing families with sheep if their men are recruited to fight in President Vladimir Putin's war with Ukraine. So live rams are being given to wives and mothers after protests in Siberia by women angered about men being mobilised to take part in the conflict. Now, so there's also, obviously, with the conscription, they've even been, I think the conscription is extended to people of dual nationality. So people who are American who have dual nationality in Russia have been conscripted. You've got build-up on the Russia-Georgia border of people trying to escape conscription. But sheep, is this, I mean, that feels desperate to me.
It's very desperate. That's a good sign. I am a little bit worried. If my wife was offered a sheep, she would take it and be very happy. She did very well out of.
I think it's a good deal.
Exchange, yeah.
That's a good deal.
The kids would be like, "Yeah, we got a sheep.
You've got a sheep. You've got
See you
milk.
later, Dad. Have fun." Yeah, and also in that same article, there was a whole thing about how sperm donation has increased massively because these boys or people are going off to fight thinking that they're going to die, which they may well do. And they're afraid that they're not going to have any kids or have any continuation. So there's... And some of these firms now that take the donations are actually offering a 10% discount for mobilised people. So, if you want to go to Russia...
This all sounds like it's made up.
No, it's not made up. This was in a newspaper.
That is one way in which the sheep can't replace you as a dad.
Well, we would hope not.
Yeah.
Cloning.
I mean, Steve, it does feel a bit like Putin is getting desperate.
Yes. Yeah, this seems ridiculous. But also, it really shows you the value you have as a man. If you're not providing something to someone you're not considered as worthy, we're going to nick you and take you for a war and replace you with an animal and some veg is basically all they get. A couple of meals out of it. But I don't blame the people for trying to escape this. Being conscripted into war you disagree with. There was a story in the news about how the wives were really upset at the idea of losing their partner. One woman in the article said that she'd break both of her husband's legs to stop him being sent to war. And the question there is both. Like one leg
one would
do it. The other one's because you don't do the dishwasher.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I mean, it's very interesting what you say about fighting in a war you don't want to be a part of. And obviously, this might account for Ukraine's success in pushing back, because they're actually fighting for something that matters to them.
Yeah, but also there was a story about how they were looking to prisons to send people from prison to this war. But the thing is, if you're going to just jail everyone who disagrees with you politically, the people in prison are not going to be fighting on your side.
No, exactly.
You're just recruiting more for the other team.
Very interesting. Well, anyway, after the break on Free Speech Nation, we're going to be asking why the Labour Women's Declaration Group were denied a stand at this week's conference. See you in 2 minutes.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB News Day with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. I'm not here to mess around with all the biggest topics and guests. You will always be up to date. GB News Day and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me! And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Welcome back to Free Speech Nation with me, Andrew Doyle. The group Labour Women's Declaration were denied a stand at the party's conference in Liverpool this week. Labour say applications for the conference were oversubscribed and that there is no question of the gender-critical group being banned. But with me to discuss this, I have Bronwyn Davis, a founding member of the Labour Women's Declaration group, and Dr. Jumin Zhu, a Labour Party member who was at the conference this week and is also a supporter of the group. Thank you both for joining me. Bronwyn, I want to come to you first and ask a bit about what the Labour Women's Declaration actually is.
Right. Well, it was drawn up in 2019, just before the general election. 12 women from all over the UK got together, decided we need something to campaign about. And so we drew up the declaration. It's got 7 principles. It's very focused on the law. So the first statement, the first principle is a statement that women are oppressed and discriminated against because of our sex. But the second principle draws attention to the fact that we have the right to, as everybody does, freedom of expression, freedom of assembly and freedom of belief. And that, as you know, is based on the UN Convention of Human Rights. And then we go on, the third principle is women should be able to discuss issues, policies which affect them without abuse, harassment or intimidation.
Well, all of this sounds incredibly reasonable. And
thank you.
You would wonder why this would be in any way contentious or why Labour would deny you a stand at the conference.
Yes, you would. The reason that we were given for... We applied for... We've been in existence as an organisation around the Declaration now for nearly 3 years. The Declaration is online. It's got... there were 300 founding signatories, and we've gathered another 7,500 signatories since then. And we continue to gather signatures at the rate of about 7 a day on average. But we'd applied this year for a stall in good time. We'd held a fringe meeting last year, and we had an acknowledgement. We were told it would need to be decided by the business board. But actually, we thought that was naively just a rubber stamping issue.
Yes.
We'd I think even been given an idea of where the stand would be.
Yes. Oh, so it was all in place. It was all going to happen.
We thought so. And we, made plans accordingly. because we were delighted at
What do you think
the
happened?
prospect.
Why do you think it didn't go through?
Well, that's an interesting question. The business board, when it finally met, said it was for commercial reasons, as if our money somehow wasn't good enough. But we don't know.
So, if I can come to you, Dr. Zhu, you're a Labour Party member, and you obviously support what the Labour Women's Declaration is doing.
Yes.
Why do you think it's so important?
I came to know this issue when 2 years ago, J.K. Rowling said sex is real. I heard this, I think, well, what is the argument? Of course sex is real. So I start to search, why is there such an argument about it? And I find that there's this new ideology, the gender ideology, saying that your internal feeling of your gender identity should replace your biological sex in important documents. I feel that is very wrong. People often talk about toilet. Toilet is the smallest issue because for gender identity to replace biological sex, it has important implication in issues like sports.
Yes,
right?
of course.
So that now there's a biological male cannot compete with in women's sports games, which I feel is unfair to women. And then also what happens in women's prison, women's domestic violence shelters, women's hospital ward, there are biological men in those women's units. This affects women's safety in all this ground, in all these spaces.
And why do you think that the Labour Party can't see, what you're outlining there seems very clear to me, that women's rights often, in some circumstances, do depend on the preservation or a recognition of sex differences. Why is that so difficult for some people high up in the Labour Party to grasp?
I don't entirely know. You need to ask them. But I think that the common line I have been told that trans women are women, trans men are men, non-binary people are what they say they are. I find that is you are replacing that a self-proclaim to replace the biological reality. That is quite dangerous.
Bronwyn Davies, can I bring you in on that? Because, you know, a lot of people will say, well, any objections to self-ID must be coming from a place of hate or transphobia or this kind of thing. How would you respond to that?
Well, like many people, I don't think that saying sex is real and that there are two sexes, male and female, is anything other than common sense. It is not transphobic. Transphobic means a hatred of trans people. And just saying that sex is real, it isn't transphobic. To me, sex is one thing and gender identity is something completely different. Not everybody feels they need a gender identity. But if you look at the Equality Act, which is also referenced in the Labour Women's Declaration, there are a number of groups that are protected against discrimination, and women are protected on the grounds of sex. Trans people are protected on the grounds of gender reassignment. So we both have the same, both groups have the same protection.
Do you think that Labour is losing its way on this? I mean, we've had Rosie Duffield has obviously spoken out, and she received threats and all sorts of things for doing so. She said this year that if Eddie Izzard were to be on the all-female shortlist for a place, she would leave the Labour Party. But she seems to be an outlier.
Well, I don't know that that's quite true. It was very interesting being at Labour Party conference this year compared with a year ago. I was at both. And there has been a real shift during that time. I think you talk about the leadership and people in senior positions. We are being listened to, very much so. But I think there's more listening that needs to be happening and further to go. We're getting more support. Brave MPs like those that spoke at our Fringe meeting, which was chaired by one of the Labour MPs, Tonya Antoniazzi. Diana Johnson was one of the speakers. Rosie Duffield was in the audience and contributed from the floor. But those are just the tip of the iceberg. We do have more support.
Dr. Zhu, do you feel the same way? Do you think the Labour Party is in danger of losing voters if it doesn't resolve this issue?
This is certainly a contentious issue, but I think Labour is improving on this issue. Last year, I have been there as an attendee. That I saw that they have to keep the location secret last year and this year. However, this year, the list of the fringe event of Labour Women's Declaration is listed on the official party, the conference book.
But didn't get a stall, though.
Didn't get a stall.
Right.
But I see some improvement.
Sort of, yeah.
Sort of improvement. So I hope next year they would have a stand and enlisted like all the other socialist societies.
But they have, I mean, we had this last year with LGB Alliance, for instance. LGB Alliance is non-partisan, right? And they were denied a stall as well. So, I mean, they were. You know, is it not fair to say that there is a problem? And I accept that this is a problem in Tories as well. But I think with Labour it's particularly pronounced.
I don't know about that. I think it is a cross-party issue. We work very closely, Labour Women's Declaration works very closely with groups in other political parties. And the other interesting point for me is that it's not an issue simply of the right or the left within the Labour Party. The Labour Party is a broad church, but women right across the spectrum are affected by this. Women right, from Open Labour to Momentum have been abused, harassed, intimidated, all those things, and this isn't acceptable. And women are not prepared to put up with it. We will change things because it's also discriminatory.
And before we finish, can you let the viewers know where can they find out more about the Labour Women's Declaration?
Oh, well, as I said, it is online. If you Google Labour Women's Declaration, it's in the form of a petition. And if you feel like signing it when you've read it, you're able to do that. You're also able to leave comments. Could I read you a recent comment?
You may.
This is from Anonymous. You can put your name. But on September the 29th, it just said, left-wing Labour voter my entire life, and the promotion of gender ideology and the suppression of women's views means I will struggle to vote Labour. Thank you to the brave women standing up to this.
I mean,
this gives us great heart.
Well, that is encouraging. Well, thank you both very much for joining me today. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
And after the break, on Free Speech Nation, we're going to be discussing why the trans youth charity Mermaids are being investigated by the Charity Commission for unethical practices. Join us then.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB News Day with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. I'm not here to mess around with all the biggest topics and guests. You will always be up to date. GB News Day and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh, my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Welcome back to Free Speech Nation with me, Andrew Doyle. Trans youth charity mermaids are being investigated by the Charity Commission for unethical practices. An article in The Telegraph revealed red flags in its dealings with children. The charity are accused of sending controversial breast-binding devices to children as young as 13 without their parents' knowledge. A statement from the Charity Commission read, "Concerns have been raised with us about mermaids' approach to safeguarding young people. We have opened a regulatory compliance case and have written to the trustees. We now await their reply." I'm joined now by the author and director of advocacy for campaign group Sex Matters, Helen Joyce. Thank you for joining me, Helen. A lot of people watching might not know what mermaids are or what they do, so perhaps you can help fill us in on that.
So they started out as a parents' self-help group. They were a really small little charity, and I think they did good work. You know, parents whose children are gender dysphoric or who say that they're trans, that was a tiny number of kids 15, 20 years ago, but a very difficult situation to be in. And then they kind of, you know, grew like Topsy and turned into something completely different, which is an ideological group that's pushing gender identity as the explanation for everything. You know, they lobbied quite hard for a very different and very aggressive approach to medical treatment for trans kids. You know, they produce materials for schools. They go in, they train teachers. They tell teachers to tell kids that what makes you a boy or a girl is how you perform gender stereotypes and so on. And most recently, they've taken a legal case against the Charity Commission for accepting the registration of the LGB Alliance, which is a charity that represents anyone who's same-sex attracted or bisexual, but not the whole gender identity stuff.
So there's a lot to think about within that. I mean, you mentioned the idea of how their mermaid's view of gender is based on gender stereotypes. In your excellent book, Trans, When Ideology Meets Reality, you actually cite a leaked training session where they scale gender according to, from one end is Barbie, and the other end is G.I. Joe.
That's right. They tell teachers that they should explain to children that, you know, not everybody is a boy or a girl, that some people are in between, that they should think about the stereotypes that make people boys and girls, and they should place themselves on what they called a gender scale. And it literally was a picture of Barbie at one end and G.I. Joe at the other end, and sort of morphing jelly babies in between. You know, around the middle, it's got a sort of a sideways hat that looks like a pan, and at one end there's little pigtails, and the other end's really beefy, you know. And so you're meant to look at this, and if you're a kid who, you know, a girl who likes climbing and hates frills, or you're a boy who likes ballet and hates football or something, you must look at this and think, oh, goodness, maybe I'm not actually at one end or the other.
But that question maybe is that they don't really seem to entertain that, because they push the idea of gender affirmation. So a child comes along and says, I think I'm this. Their policy is, well, we must affirm that, not talk about it or explore it or anything like that.
Well, that's right, because they believe that everybody is born with a gender identity. There's this central contradiction in all of this, that they say everyone's born with a gender identity, but that gender identity reveals itself through gender stereotypes.
Right.
So when you call them out and you say, look, you're just peddling gender stereotypes, they say, no, 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 there's a gender identity, it's different, it's innate. And you say, but how would you know what a child's gender identity is? Oh, they'll reveal it through stereotypes.
Now, you mentioned that mermaids had called for LGB Alliance to be stripped of its charity status. That has resulted in a court case, which has been much publicised. And a representative for mermaids appeared at that court hearing and said that they don't offer medical advice. Well, it looks like maybe they do.
Well, they send out breast binders. I mean, I know parents whose children have received them, so I'm sure that's correct. You know, I too am a journalist. I too hear from parents directly. But the other thing that they did was they were very aggressively pushing gender affirmation inside the Tavistock clinic.
Yes.
Which was the, you know, very controversial and soon to be closed NHS clinic.
Yes.
So that was, by international standards, that was quite a conservative clinic, like quite slow to medicalise children until about 2014. But mermaids' parents were pushing and saying, we bring our kids abroad for puberty blockers, we bring our kids abroad for cross-sex hormones before you let us have them. And they changed the practice inside the NHS. So not to give medical advice.
No, I mean, if they're actually having that kind of influence, then that's it.
Absolutely.
And, you know, studies are coming out that are suggesting there are all sorts of dangers with chest binders, even with the puberty drugs.
You shouldn't need to ask, should you? It's like, if you're going to go squashing down a body part day in, day out and constrict your breathing, of course it's going to cause problems. The Met Police say that children from parts of Africa where they do what's called breast ironing, which is like really flattening down a child's breasts as they grow, a girl's breasts as they grow, that's child abuse.
Yes.
And the parents usually think they're doing a good thing, but it's still child abuse. Well, breast binders are that.
And the Telegraph is saying that on these forums, they were encouraging young people without parents' knowledge, to undertake that kind of practice.
Yes, and I suspect that it was only occasionally that, but if you are going to have forums for young people, you have to have the most meticulous child safeguarding. You know, absolutely everything has to be double and triple checked. You have to be overseeing and overseeing. You do not direct people to go and have conversations off your chat.
Yes.
And they do seem to have done that. So that's the sort of thing that the Charity Commission is going to look at.
And they do seem to have an incredible degree of clout. I mean, they've been funded by Starbucks, for instance, did a big campaign to raise money for mermaids. Is it just the case that people have just decided that their approach is right without really looking into it?
I think so. And I also think from mermaids' point of view, it must seem very strange that they're the ones who are being picked on, because there are literally hundreds of groups of various sizes that are pushing this stuff.
Yes.
And in particular, some other big ones like Gendered Intelligence, which also write similar sorts of teaching materials that also train teachers. You know, the sorts of materials that your kids are learning in RSE or PSHE lessons, you really, really need to go and look at them. You need to demand to see them and check what they're being told, because a lot of them are influenced by this entire sort of arena of lobby groups, and Mermaids is not the only one.
Is it the case, though, that the case that they brought against LGBT Alliance, that's the reason they're being scrutinised so much in particular?
I'm not sure. I mean, it can't have helped, because it's certainly an extraordinary case that they brought. It's not usual for one charity to try and get another charity delisted on ideological grounds.
Yes.
In fact, I don't know that it's ever happened before. But I think people have been pushing for years. I know that people have sent things to the Charity Commission before, and the Charity Commission has brushed them off. I think they've thought that it's, you know, the Green Ink Brigade. But then a sort of, a weight of evidence has come out in the press, and now they really have to look.
Yes, but I mean, the very fact that they did that suggests that they are sincere in their views, that they believe LGBT Alliance or people who are advocating for same-sex attracted people, or people who are flagging up the potential risks of affirming a child's gender identity without any explorative therapeutic procedure, that those people are in fact hateful and transphobic. I think they probably genuinely believe that, don't they?
But I think you have to look at who's running Mermaids. So the people at the top of Mermaids are all people who've transitioned their own children. And so they're people who have their own ideological stance on this. They've done something with their own children that they now require the rest of us to play along with. So if you have a son and you've transitioned that son and you say that your son is now your daughter, she, her, girl's name, girl's clothes, puberty blockers, cross-sex hormones, you are making an implicit promise to that child that everyone else will play along.
Yes.
And now other people are saying, do you know what? No, you can't be in girls' sports. You can't be in girls' changing rooms. If you go to prison, you won't go to a women's prison. You're making a liar out of that parent.
So there's a personal stake
There's
here.
a very big personal stake. And the LGBT Alliance in particular is saying that sexual orientation is based on your sex, not your gender identity. So again, it's saying the things that the people involved in Mermaids are saying to their own children, those things aren't going to be societally accepted by everybody. And that's really difficult. So I think that's why. I think it's very personal.
And for a long time, people weren't able to have these conversations. And, I mean, you argue in your book that I think one of the reasons you say why this went so far and why we ended up with men identifying as women, even if they had a history of sexual assault and going to a female prison, is because people just wouldn't believe that that could be happening.
Exactly. It just seems extraordinary, doesn't it? I mean, people just think, oh, tinfoil hat brigade, when they hear these things. And then suddenly it comes to their own classroom, their own child's classroom, to the office near them. They're told that suddenly, the toilets are going gender neutral or something like that, and they're not allowed to say anything because it's bigotry. And then they belatedly realise that, Cassandra has been shouting for years, but they were saying, oh, no, that's nonsense.
There's all sorts of problems with misrepresentation of the law, misrepresentation of the Equalities Act. I mean, last week I was talking to Caroline Fisk about the Royal Borough of Greenwich, which has actually been sending out details on inclusive language to parents and to teachers. And in that document, it says the Equality Act refers to this as sex, but what they really mean is gender identity. But that's not what they really mean.
No. I mean, sex, male and female are words that have strict legal meanings that are established in British law. And they're the thing that you were conceived, the thing that a doctor noticed perhaps at this 13-week scan.
Yes.
And definitely noticed when you were born and put on the birth certificate. That's your sex. And that's the thing that's in the Equality Act.
But activists would say sex is merely assigned.
Listen, don't make me swear on air.
But they would say that, wouldn't they? They would say it's almost like guesswork.
But there are flat Earth believers. There are people who think the Earth is 3,000 years old. I can't believe that we have to engage with this level of nonsense.
But we sort of do, don't we? I mean, ultimately...
I wrote an entire book about it.
You did, so that's true. And when it comes to the Cass report, I want to ask you about this, because the Cass report did ultimately result in the finding that the Tavistock Clinic wasn't safe for young people. Can you talk to us a bit about that?
So Hilary Cass is a very eminent paediatrician, and the government asked her to look right across gender services for youth. in the NHS. And they are mostly provided just at this one clinic in London, the Tavistock Clinic, and long waiting lists, very ideological, very patchy approach, very much captured by the lobby, mermaids, gendered intelligence, and a lot of them. Doesn't do good research, doesn't do good follow-up, isn't able to tell people really what puberty blockers do to you, whatever. And so she wrote this interim report. Her final report is due out next year, and in it she really wrote some very sensible things about how we don't have the research base we need, that if a child says gender, then everything else that's happening with that child gets sidelined. So the kids who are seen at the Tavistock very often are autistic spectrum, they're anxious, they're depressed, they're self-harming, they've got eating disorders, like there's all these comorbidities, but as soon as you say gender, it's just gender.
Right.
And so what Hilary Cass said is that separation of gender issues from everything else was not treating gender-distressed children well, and that those services needed to go back into mainstream mental health services for children around the country and be dealt with alongside other things, the way that you would think that they should be. And by doing that, I mean, a lot of activists have pointed out there are these other clinics opening up, but they'll face more scrutiny, won't they, than Tavistock? Yes, but also they're meant to be integrated clinics. So a child comes along and says, scars all over their arms, I think I'm a boy, and they say, let's talk about the scars on your arms first. Yes. Like, that's the right way to go, isn't it? Absolutely. Just quickly before we finish, are you confident that with things such as the Cass report, the closure of the Tavistock, this potential investigation into mermaids, that we're moving in the right direction and actually we can get back to a situation where people recognise the importance of biological sex in social situations? I know we're moving in the right direction, but we've an awfully long way to go. 20 years of this sort of stuff has just, sent its tendrils out into every part of our society, and schools are teaching nonsense, all of them, constantly, and then they tell parents they're bigots if they complain about it. That's the thing that worries me most, what's happening in schools. That's where we have to sort this out. Helen Joyce, thanks very much. Thank you for having me on. Now, we were hoping to interview a guest from Mermaids on the show, but they declined our invitation. But they did send a statement. They say, we're in the midst of a targeted, cynical attack on mermaids and the services we provide. We believe this to be an attack on the trans community as a whole and an attempt to undermine the rights we have fought and will continue to fight so hard for. We felt it important to reassure the families and young people that need us and the wider community that we will not be bullied or intimidated by those with an anti-trans agenda. Helen, do you have an anti-trans agenda? I don't want trans children treated worse than all other children, and that's what's happening now. They're not getting the healthcare they need because they're being dealt with in an ideological way. I want them to get the same standard of evidence and care and thought and support and safeguarding as all other children. Yes. Well said. Now, yes, I think that deserves a round of applause. It's now time for Social Sensations, and every week we dedicate this part of the show to the world of social media. First up, Virgin Atlantic. They've got a new advert out, and the airline has changed its uniform policy to make it more inclusive. Check it out. Now, they're very good dancers, but I don't want them doing that on the plane. Because, I mean, it could easily steer things off course, couldn't it? You're a good dancer, Josh. What do you think about that advert?
Digging that too. Yeah. What a beautiful video.
Yeah. What's going on there?
Madness.
Do you think it's just madness?
Madness, insanity. It's more virtue signalling from big corporations.
What do you think, Steve?
No, annoyingly, I agree.
That's a shame.
I'd love to fall out on that
you to say we should all be wearing pronoun badges and dancing.
Yeah, but I don't care what people wear on planes, but that also means I don't care if people show off about what people wear on planes.
Yeah.
So it's, yeah.
There's a really weird thing about their statement. Virgin Atlantic was saying that they wanted to make sure that customers were being addressed with their proper pronouns. But if you address people with their pronouns, it's really weird. How is he today? That's odd, isn't it? That's creepy.
Always third person.
Yeah, it's patronising. So
yeah, the pronoun I'm in for is you.
You would work.
I'd take thou, if you want.
Thou.
I find that very offensive. Or you, please don't do that.
We need to bring back thee and thou. Anyway, earlier this week, a countdown contestant made history with the show's highest ever score. He did it in style, too. Take a look at this.
Are we about to witness the highest score in the history of the greatest game show ever to grace our TV screens? Let's reveal today's possibly historic countdown conundrum. Bombs buzzed in.
Volunteer.
Let's have a look. Yes! We've just witnessed history.
I mean, it is history. It's historical. He looks very pleased with himself.
Harry
Fair play.
Potter's let himself go a bit.
He has a bit.
Yeah. He looks very smug.
Well, wouldn't you be? I mean, it's a difficult game.
I saw it as volunteer, like that.
Did you?
Even when they did it.
No, you didn't.
I don't even know what that game is.
You not watch Countdown? But you're a board game person. I thought you would enjoy Countdown.
No, like not like word stuff. Logic.
Oh, you like things
resources and converting this into that and
dragons and things, that sort of thing.
If I have to.
If there are dragons. What do you make of that? Are you a Countdown fan, Steve?
No, because I am not very good at spelling or mental arithmetic. So you can imagine, for me, it's mainly just some fun adverts halfway through.
Yes.
But
I thought you were good at mental arithmetic.
No, I know. Oh, trigonometrical functions all over it, but adding up in my head, can't do it.
Really?
Yeah.
That really surprises me.
Terrible at GCSE, but nailed the A level. It's really good.
Yeah, okay.
But we should give credit where it's due. That is
an incredible score.
That's the best thing that guy's ever going to do.
Yeah, I mean, well, fair play. It's probably more than I'll ever achieve. Anyway, by the way, I will be at the Tory conference in Birmingham this week discussing my latest book. I'm going to be appearing with Toby Young, and it's free, so you should come along. But one Twitter user probably won't be in attendance. Let's have a look at this. This is Sean Biggerstaff. He says, this would be the perfect moment for Birmingham to be devastated by a massive earthquake. That's in response to me and Toby having a chat about the importance of liberal values. It's a nice... what do you make of that?
You've made that guy pro-fracking.
Yeah, exactly. That's what he's after. Yeah. It's odd. He's an actor. He apparently was in a few of the Harry Potter films. He's one of the team captains on Quidditch or something. It does feel a bit weird that he's so angry about people who might disagree with him having a chat, so much so that he has wild fantasies of killing everyone in Birmingham.
I don't think it's weird. I think it's what we've seen for the last 5-6 years played out on Twitter specifically. And to see the video, I'm not a fan of Jacob Rees-Mogg, but there's video footage today of him being sort of followed around. He's got like 20 police around him and people just screaming. It's unnecessary.
It's weird, isn't it?
You disagree with this person. He has different ideas. I don't think he's a moral human being either. But you still... That's not how we behave in a civilised society.
I mean, to be fair, that's Twitter, but it's from a very big account on Twitter. I think he's got 45,000 followers. This is someone who... I mean...
I know you bragging, basically?
No, it's
this
his
really
followers.
famous guy hates me.
Yeah, well, OK. Maybe I should see it as a good thing. I don't know. But
Don't worry, because it doesn't matter how famous he is or how many followers he has. He can't change tectonic plates.
He can't produce an actual earthquake.
Are you saying that Harry Potter's not real?
Dun, dun, dun.
I do think there's something bizarre, though, Steve. I mean, that's just an example. You know, I get that every day, to be honest. In fact, that's relatively mild. But I would say that it's a weird response. And as Josh was saying, you know, if you're screaming at someone, if you're tweeting that you hope they die in an earthquake, that's not normal adult behaviour, is it? But it is very common now.
But I thought you would have got this more. I thought you would have understood, because you deal with it way more than I ever have.
Yeah.
But for me, it seems obvious that on social media, the rules are different. On social media, if you go too far, if you say something where all you're doing is showing your anger, you're rewarded. If you want to get favourites...
Rewarded by the algorithm, you mean?
Yeah, and the likes or whatever else that you're in there for. You'll get dopamine because you were too much on social media.
I think... But that would be me intuiting that his motive... for me... Because it would never occur to me to write something like that and post it online. And so I find it difficult to understand why other people do. But maybe that's my narcissism. Maybe that's my issue. Who the hell knows? Why can't people just be nicer? So strange. Anyway, I think we have time for one unfiltered dilemma. Just one, they're telling me. So the first dilemma, this seems implausible, but my production team assure me it is 100% legitimate. This was emailed in by James. Should Lewis have his own show on GB News? And there's a picture there of Lewis Schaefer, who's off and on the show. I mean, he would like to think so, wouldn't he, Josh?
I think it'd be great. No guests, just him hating women.
I mean, he just rants about all sorts of stuff. I'm always worried when he's on because of the things he says.
From like 12 till 12 at night, 6 in the morning, just him just having a mental breakdown. I would watch that every day.
Last time I was on with him, it wasn't...
No audience.
No audience. It can start off with an audience, but by the end, no audience.
Oh, well, that's fair enough. That's pretty standard of his shows as well, anyway. Love you, Lewis, if you're watching. I hope you are. Anyway, thank you for joining us for Free Speech Nation. This was the week when feminists were denied a stall at the Labour conference, but racist comments were giving an airing. Protests in Iran intensified. The Charity Commission opened an investigation into mermaids. And Vladimir Putin attempted to win the war with the help of sheep. Thank you very much to my panel, Steve N. Allen and Josh Howie, and to all of my guests. And if you want to join us live in the studio and be part of our audience, you can do that. Just go to www.bbc.co.uk sroaudiences.com. It's right there on the screen. We supply wine, we supply vol au vents. It's a wonderful time. Stay tuned for the brilliant Mark Dolan tonight, and don't forget, Headliners is on at 11 o'clock. Thanks for watching Free Speech Nation. Farewell.
Looking ahead to tomorrow's weather, and the UK is looking dry in many places, but rain will move into Scotland and Northern Ireland. Let's take a look at those details. It will be a dry and cloudy start to the day across Scotland, but outbreaks of rain will reach the Western Isles closer to lunchtime. Rain will quickly spread into Northern Ireland on Monday morning, arriving from the west. It will turn breezy through the morning too. A few showers will spread into the coast of northwest England during the morning, but much of northern England will stay dry with some hazy sunshine. A chilly start in Wales, with a few mist and fog patches in the valleys. Skies will be largely cloudy with a few brighter spells at times. A veil of high cloud will give some hazy sunshine across the Midlands on Monday morning. It will be a chilly start with temperatures around 5 Celsius in parts of the countryside first thing in the morning. Skies are likely to be a bit brighter in East Anglia to start the day, with some mist and fog in places. However, it will turn cloudier throughout the morning. It will be a sunny start in the south of England with just a few mist and fog patches. Sunshine will turn hazy through the morning with increasing amounts of high cloud. Rain will turn rather heavy in Northern Ireland through the morning before spreading across much of Scotland in the afternoon. And that is how the weather is shaping up during tomorrow morning.
I'm Mark Dolan. Join me at 11 on GB News for Headliners, in which I'll be joined by two of the UK's top comedians discussing tomorrow's papers. If it's an important story, we'll cover it, but we'll have some fun along the way. Headliners, the late-night paper review that won't send you to sleep like the others will. 7 nights a week at 11 p.m. on GB News.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB News Day with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. I'm not here to mess around. With all the biggest topics and guests, you will always be up to date. GB News Day and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get